Our scene takes place at Turner Bay. Note, that's not Turner's Bay, it's Turner Bay. Named so because no ship can survive its hazardous waters without the strongest of rudders and the highest of masts. That's probably because it's located on a really narrow, rocky peninsula. The subject of our picture is a vessel that has been in long disuse. It didn't have the right rudder or mast, so it wasn't able to make the turn of Turner Bay. Instead of sailing on the Big Blue, it will be stuck beached at these docks. Notice that the mast is much shorter than its counterparts in the background. Let this remind you that Turner syndrome patients often present with short stature. And it looks like it's been a long time since this ship has set sail, so long that cobwebs are accumulating all over it, including that mast. Let the two biggest cobwebs and the other ones remind you that these patients may also present with a webbed neck. See these shields? It must have been a warship. The shields represent the classic shield chest presentation in Turner syndrome patients. And whenever wood gets wet, it can warp, so let the warped irregular wood at the front of the ship remind you that Turner syndrome patients can present with a cystic hygroma on the neck. And it looks like there's a reason so many ships pass through these treacherous waters. Turner Bay is obviously a hub for trade. The cargo pallets stacked high next to the ship should remind you of a high arcing pallet, which your patient may have. And look at the emblem of the orca arc. It's an orca, of course. And I've drawn this orca to more closely resemble the arching aorta. It has 3 dorsal fins to represent the brachiocephalic, left carotid and subclavian arteries. And the tail has a narrowing before it has a fin. That narrowing is the actual coarctation that we're focusing on. This ship obviously won 3rd prize in fastest ships competition or something. So that number 3 should remind you of the number 3 sign on chest x-ray. Also, the sails have been drawn with rib-like projections, and these rib-like projections are actually notched. They have notches in them. That reminds you that on chest x-ray you may also see notched ribs in Turner syndrome patients. Speaking of the aorta, look at that captain's steering wheel. Doesn't that kind of look like a bicuspid aortic valve? It's drawn like a valve handle with 2 segments to remind you that their aortic valve may be bicuspid rather than tricuspid. And I hope you're familiar with the horseshoe crab, because those aren't barnacles on the side of the ship. Horseshoe crabs are actually endemic to Turner Bay, and it looks like a few of them are still stuck on the side of the boat whenever it was pushed onto the sand. Let these horseshoe crabs remind you that Turner syndrome patients may present with a single horseshoe kidney or other renal anomalies. And this deep streak that was left when the crew pulled or pushed it ashore should remind you of the streak ovaries Turner syndromes usually present with, which are entrenched in the pathophysiology of Turner syndrome. And since we're talking about how the ship was beached, think of the beached ship as an unusually dry ship. This can remind you that Turner syndrome patients often will present in your office with primary amenorrhea or incompleted puberty. Turn your attention to the innkeep over yonder. Is that an innkeep, or is that a brothel? So back in the olden times, it actually wasn't uncommon for ports like this one to be dotted with raunchy innkeeps or brothels where sailors could relax after a long voyage at sea. The beautiful mosaic advertising its purpose, which says X and O for hugs and kisses, should serve to remind you that Turner syndrome is due fundamentally to a 45XO genotype where the patient is mixing an X chromosome. Sometimes all of the patient's cells have a missing X chromosome, but about half the time they're actually a mosaic, a figurative mosaic. So this literal mosaic can remind you of that. 2 more things to notice: the odd sperm-like pattern on the roof and the divulging pathway leading into the brothel. So the weird tile pattern on the roof will remind you that if the patient has all cells that are missing an X chromosome, that might have been due to a sperm that was missing a sex chromosome whenever it fertilized the egg, which already had an X chromosome because it was an egg. The splitting pathway should serve to remind you of chromosome non-disjunction, which can occur early in embryogenesis, causing part of the patient's cells to have what we'd call usual or normal genotype, whereas the rest of them are missing an X chromosome. And what did I say? The Orca Ark was a fast pirate war machine. Look at all this loot and fish Peggy saved from his pirate days. These stand for luteinizing hormone and FSH for fish, which are both elevated in these patients. The hypothalamus and anterior pituitary are telling the ovaries, make estrogen, but remember, the patient has streak ovaries, so there's not much, if any, negative feedback by estrogen produced endogenously. Yo-ho! Is that Peggy the pirate and his bird Polly? Maybe the crew of Orca Ark lingers on. Interesting factoid, old Peggy doesn't actually have amputated legs. The pegs are just there to make him a little taller. And he's a softie at heart. He's been helping roost Polly's little eggs. Polly was trying to conceive for so long, and now she and her master are so happy. Peg, for Peggy the Pirate, is spelled P-E-G. P and E stand for progesterone and estrogen, which are supplemented in Turner syndrome for puberty and combined with in vitro fertilization for conception in some patients who desire children. And G stands for growth hormone, which is also used early in life so that these patients reach a more desirable height. So next time you get a question involving a girl with short stature, web neck, presenting with primary amenorrhea, think about Turner Bay, and hopefully this picture will help save you a point or two on the exam.